Your Excellency, Ambassador Christian Barros, Mr. Sergeant Jindal and Mrs. Sangita Jindal, Mr. Jesus Clavero and Professor Aparajit Chattopadhyay, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really here to celebrate many kinds of collaboration at the same time. A collaboration between India and Chile, which is so satisfying. A collaboration between the Jindal JSW Foundation and the literary works of a Nobel Prize winner. A collaboration between painting and poetry, and a collaboration between the works of the great Gabriela Mistral and the people she loved the most, I think, in the world, children. And to see the products of this in this book has been particularly gratifying. Because the paintings by children are themselves acts of interpretation. Interpretation is, of course, an act of intellect as well as of imagination. But the children have brought in their own sensibilities, their experiences, while illustrating the poems. The themes that run through the poems are those of love, of anguish, of divinity, of spiritual exaltedness, nature, natural beings, innocence and experience. And of course, the poems themselves have universal themes. William Wordsworth has talked of a silent communion between man and nature, an imperceptible harmony that transcends almost all other relationships. In Gabriela Mistral's poems, the silent, delicate, and abiding relationship between the individual and the natural state of being is evident. The other great theme that is prevalent in her poetry is that of innocence. A child's innocence, or the purity that motivates an animal's actions, untainted by experience, by cynicism, and perhaps the cynicism that experience inevitably brings. If you look at the poems that they have selected for this volume, and I'm sure Professor Chattopadhyay has explained why these choices were made. The first poem, Rocking, sheds light on how listening to the sounds of the ocean rocking its waves against the shore, a mother puts her child, her baby, to sleep in a cradle. The metaphor used in this is very effective and lyrical, and is evocative of a gentle rocking motion, lulling the child to sleep. The poem continues to elicit imagery from nature. Just like the wandering wind in the night travels back and forth to rock the wheat in the fields, the mother lovingly rocks her child to sleep. And then there is also the image of the Father, or God, in the poem, the all-encompassing Father. The poem goes on to indicate that just as the Father looks after the universe, the mother, after acknowledging the blessings from the one above, looks after her child. Now, this is perhaps too much detail. I'm not going to go into so much about so many of the poems, but there are so many others. The poem Dew talks again about a mother and a child, comparing it to a rose laden with dewdrops. The poem Give Me Your Hand is about the bonds of friendship, and the song Dance, Beauty and Vitality that friendship provides. Little Bud is a poem about love and loss, a little flower bud that grew as tall as a tree and then abandoned its caregiver. In order to seek solace, the narrator in the poem consoles herself by singing the two lines that is a refrain from the first verse, I had a little flower bud close against my heart. And it flows from there to a poem called Fear, which is the writer's trepidation of watching a daughter growing up. It's written in a playful, childlike fashion, but the narrator clearly fears that the daughter will turn into a swallow, make a nest amongst the trees and never come back, or become a princess, wear golden slippers, and no longer play in the fields near her parents' home. And if she were to be made a queen, she would be placed on a throne so high that her mother would not be able to reach her. The poem is in many ways about a mother's fear of being extricated from her daughter when he grows up, when she grows up, I beg your pardon. And the poet uses endearing imagery in order to communicate that to her child. There's so much more. You saw the illustration of the poem Discovery, about a stranger walking in a field of harvested wheat to find a little boy sleeping peacefully. The woman then thinks about whether it was oversight on her part and that it was really a vineyard, in which case she hopes that the boy will not disappear from sight like the frost on the vine leaves. Or The Girl with the Crippled Hand is about a little girl whose little finger was stolen by the sea, and the endeavours by clams, by whalers and fishermen to retrieve the lost finger. Slightly odd idea, but a very intriguing one. There's so much more. I'm not really going to walk through every single poem here, but the fact is that what is striking is the imagery in the poems, the skill, of course, of the great poet, and then the work of the children, accompanying the poems with bright illustrations in bold brushstrokes, a delightful collection which is both insightful and profound, and yet, precisely because of the illustrations, something that children can read and relate to. And it's so appropriate that this has been done for the poems of Gabriela Mistral. When I first became Minister of State for Human Resources Development, I quoted one of my favorite lines by Gabriela Mistral in my very first speech as a minister. She wrote, "We are guilty of many crimes, but our worst sin is neglecting the child. Many of our needs can wait, but the child cannot. We cannot say to the child tomorrow, her name is today." I'm just delighted that we've had this opportunity. And I'm delighted to release the book with these words. Thank you very much.
Mr. Tharoor, Mr. and Mrs. Barros, and friends. In March 2009, I had the privilege to meet Dr. Michelle Bachelet, the President of the Republic of Chile, and her team when they visited India. I was honored by her presence. I was telling her about the work that JSW Foundation does, and she mentioned that India and Chile should collaborate and enhance cultural activities. Her thoughts remained in my mind. There was a proposal from the High Commissioner of Chile, Mr. Christian Barros, to collaborate the poems of Gabriela Mistral into a book with illustrations in English and Hindi. JSW Foundation was delighted for this offer because her words were in my mind, and now we are proud to say that our collaboration worked. I am so happy that the children of Jindal Vidya Mandir have understood the nuances of the words of Gabriela Mistral and have illustrated so beautifully in the book that you will see. The joint venture is very gratifying, and collaboration between India and Chile will go a long way. I would like to thank the Embassy of Chile with their efforts. I would also like to thank Sangita Bhansali of Vakils for helping the creation of the book. We all must build more bridges for a better and harmonious world. I would urge Mr. Tharoor that this book should be not only for just the privileged, and maybe we could translate this in other languages. India is a vast country, maybe it's in Canada or Maharashtra, so that all the government schools and the underprivileged schools actually avail this opportunity. Thank you.
Muy buenas tardes. A very good afternoon to you all. Shri Shashi Tharoor, Honorable Minister of State for Human Resource Development, Government of India, His Excellency Ambassador of Chile in India, Srimati Sangita Jindal, Chairperson JSW Foundation, Sri Sajjan Jindal, Chairperson JSW, Mr. Jesus Clavero, Cultural Manager, Instituto Cervantes, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, friends, and amantes de la poesía de Gabriela Mistral. At the outset, I would like to thank the Embassy of Chile and JSW Foundation for giving me and my friend and co-translator Dr. Suresh Dhingra this opportunity of translating a selected anthology of poems of the great Latin American poet Gabriela Mistral for the benefit of the children of this subcontinent, and which will be released by the Honorable Minister this evening. Gabriela Mistral, whose real name was Lucila Godoy, was born in a very modest family in a small town called La Vicuña, which you saw in the clip right now, in 1889. Because of unfortunate family circumstances, she never got the opportunity to have formal education. She joined as an assistant to her sister, who was a school teacher in her village at the age of 15. This journey of a teacher continued till her death, which spans almost 50 years of her active life. She was a sincere and dedicated educator and a committed intellectual. Gabriela Mistral defended the rights of children, women, and the marginalized section of the society, not only through her writings, but also through affirmative actions to improve their lot. Her altruistic interest and her social concerns had a religious undertone as they sprang from her profoundly spiritual Franciscan understanding of the world. Mistral's poems have an original style marked by a disdain for the authentically pleasing elements very common among the modernist writers of her time. Though she has expressed her indebtedness to Maestro Rubén Darío, precursor of modernism in Latin America, guru of all Latin American poets of the late 19th and early 20th century, she did not follow in letter and spirit the style of modernist poets. Most of her poems are autobiographical voices of a woman whose life was marked by an intense awareness of the world and human destiny. Her poetry is thus charged with a sense of ritual and prayer. 1945 is a landmark year for Latin American literature as the world witnessed the most prestigious literary award, that is Nobel Prize for Literature, being awarded to one of the Latin America's leading poets, Gabriela Mistral. In 45 years of history of Nobel Prize, other than Tharoor, who received in 1913, no other non-European and non-North American writer was decorated with this award. In the citation, the Nobel Prize Committee wrote, and I quote, "It is to render homage to the riches of Spanish American literature that we address ourselves today, especially to its queen, the poet of Desolación, Despair, who has become a great singer of mercy and motherhood." Mistral works both in verse and prose deal with the basic passion of love as seen in the various relationships of mother and offspring, man and woman, individual and mankind, soul and God. In the poem Niño Solo, The Lonely Child, we see Mistral as an abandoned woman who has been denied the joy of motherhood and found consolation as an educator in caring for children of other women. La madre se tardó, cargada en el berbecho, el niño al despertar buscó el pezón de la rosa y rompió el llanto, yo lo estreché contra el pecho y una canción de cuna me subió temblorosa. Por la ventana abierta la luna nos miraba, el niño yo dormía y la canción bañaba como otro resplandor mi pecho enriquecido. Now the English rendering. His mother was late coming from the fields. The child woke up searching for the rose of the nipple and broke into tears. I took him to my breast and a cradle song sprang in me with a tremor. Apart from being an important literary figure, Mistral was a social reformer. Her concern for education for children, especially belonging to the deprived section of the Chilean society, turned into her passion for improving the education system in Chile in particular and in Latin America in general. She went to Mexico at the invitation of the great Mexican educator José Vasconcelos, and they together helped in planning the reforms to be carried out in Mexico immediately after the social revolution. Later on, this model was replicated in several countries of Central and Latin America. In 1906, Mistral, at the age of only 17, wrote an article titled La Instrucción de la Mujer, the Education of Woman, which shows that even at such an early age, she was aware and critical of the limitations affecting women's education in the continent. I quote Mistral, "Instruyanse a la mujer, no hay nada en ella que la haga ser colocar en un lugar más bajo que el hombre. Let women be educated. Nothing in them requires that they be set in a place lower than men." Following the great Latin American tradition of honoring the writers and intellectuals with diplomatic assignments, Gabriela Mistral was also bestowed with the honor of representing her country as consul in several countries including Portugal, Spain, USA and Brazil. She also was in charge of Latin American letters in the Institute of Cultural Cooperation in the League of Nations, where she projected Latin American literature and culture in a very effective manner. Today we have assembled here to witness the release of the translations of some of Mistral's poems from her anthology Ternura, Tenderness. It is an anthology of poems with the subjects such as childhood, maternity and nature. They are divided mainly into two categories, Canciones de Cuna, cradle songs, and Rondas, round of dances. She justified the publication of this book in a letter in which she said, I quote, "He querido hacer una poesía escolar nueva, porque la que hay en boga no me satisfece. I wanted a new type of poetry for the school children because one in fashion doesn't satisfy me." Once when she was asked which is her most favorite poem among the cradle songs, she mentioned La Paquita, the little straw, which combines fantasy with playfulness and musicality. Please allow me to recite the first stanza of this beautiful poem. Era que era una niña de cera, pero no era una niña de cera, era una gavilla parada en la acera, pero no era una gavilla, sino una flor tiesa de maravilla. At the end of one of her books, Desolación, she made an interesting remark in the form of a voto, vow. I hope God will forgive me for this bitter book. From now onwards, I will sing the words of hope and joy. Ternura, in effect, is a bright, hopeful book filled with love and affection for children. This anthology was first published in Spain, in Madrid, way back in 1924. However, the poet herself, over the next 20 years, made changes and incorporated many other poems from Desolación and Thala, and the final version was published in Argentina in 1945. We have selected around 20 poems for the purpose of translation. While doing so, our utmost concern was to make it as interesting as possible for the children. I'm sure that the children in JSW schools have found it so. The wonderful illustrations done by them give ample evidence of their liking. Thank you, children. I'm sure had Gabriela Mistral been alive today, she would have enjoyed immensely your paintings and blessed you. Please allow me to recite two of the poems which we have included in both English and Hindi versions. Para los hispanoparlantes voy a citar un texto de Mistral en que ella explica qué significa para ella el género de la canción de cuna. Aún este interesante para indios, para nosotros, porque ella compara a la madre verosímil con la diosa mitológica hindú con su boca múltiple. Cito a Gabriela Mistral. La canción de cuna, en cuanto a cosa que la madre se regala a sí misma, y no al niño que nada puede entender, a menos de guaguetear a grandullones de 3 años. Esta madre, con su boca múltiple de diosa hindú, recuenta en la canción sus afanes del día, teje y desteje sueños para cuando él sí es no es vaya creciendo. Ella dice bromas respecto del gandul. Ella lo encarga en serio a Dios y en juego a los duendes. Ella los asusta con amenazas fraudulentas y los sosiega antes de que se las crea. La letra de la canción va desde la zumbonería hasta el patético, hace un zigzag de jugarreta y de angustia, de bromas y ansiedades. Confieso que los arroros que más me gustan son los disparatados, porque aquí, mejor que en parte alguna, la lógica ha de aventarse y con cajas destempladas. Voy a recitar 2 poemas que forman parte de nuestra traducción. Voy a recitar en la versión española, el traductor les va a dar la versión inglesa. Meciendo el mar sus millares de olas mece divino, oyendo a los mares amantes mezo a mi niño. El viento errabundo en la noche mece los trigos, oyendo a los vientos amantes mezo a mi niño. Dios Padre sus miles de mundos mece sin ruido, sintiendo su mano en la sombra mezo a mi niño. The second one has now been transformed into a very popular song and is very often sung by the primary school children in Chile. One can find a beautiful musical version of this in YouTube. Dame la mano y danzaremos, dame la mano y me amarás, como una sola flor seremos, como una flor y nada más. El mismo verso cantaremos, al mismo paso bailarás, como una espiga ondularemos, como una espiga y nada más. Te llamas Rosa y yo Esperanza, pero tu nombre olvidarás, porque seremos una danza en la colina y nada más. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.